I had just turned off the ignition, the smell of fuel and grease still clinging to my skin and sleeves after another long day in the shop. With a single press of the remote, the garage door rumbled upward, revealing the creation I had poured. Nearly 2 years of my life into my pride, my spiritual child. Once nothing but a heap of rust, and now a flawless machine. Sunlight spilled across the chrome trim, bouncing off the deep, glossy paint that swallowed light like a black hole. Then a shriek shattered the moment. "That man just stole my car! Someone call 911!" It was Beverly Lang, my neighbor, and the HOA president, charging across the grass, phone glued to her ear, hurling accusations. I just stood in my driveway, keys in hand, dumbstruck. Sirens already wailed in the distance. In minutes, I was about to be mistaken for a thief of my own car. "My name's Ethan Miller. I'm 32. 6 months ago, I walked away from a career in aerospace engineering to chase my dream, restoring classic cars out of my garage. The centerpiece of it all was a 1968 Shelby GT500 Eleanor, an inheritance from my father. He'd been a street racing mechanic until he passed when I was 15. He started restoring this beast but never finished. For me, completing it wasn't just about horsepower or polished chrome. It was about honoring him, finishing what he began. Each bolt I turned, every dent I straightened, felt like a quiet conversation with him across time. Beverly, though, was the very definition of an HOA nightmare. At 45, she kept a meticulously styled blonde bob and wielded her phone like a weapon. As both HOA president and a luxury car broker, she acted as self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's standards. She measured lawns with rulers and harassed me about running what she called a business in a residential zone. And without fail, the moment I started up the Shelby, she'd appear, clipboard in hand, dripping with outrage. "Officers, thank God you're here!" she cried, practically throwing herself at the first cop who stepped out. She brandished what looked like legal paperwork, her shrill voice vibrating at a pitch sharp enough to shatter glass. "This man stole my vehicle. I have the bill of sale right here from my client in Nevada. That's a 1968 Shelby GT500. The way she looked at the car wasn't simple concern, it was hunger, possessive, as if she'd been coveting it for years, and the details she rattled off about the specs, too sharp, too rehearsed. She'd clearly done her homework. Officer Rodriguez, short and broad with weary eyes, came toward me wearing the universal look of a cop dragged into suburban theatrics instead of real crime. "Sir, may we see your documentation for this car?" Meanwhile, his partner was already circling the Shelby, snapping photos while Beverly spewed out serial numbers and engine details that, annoyingly, were accurate. I calmly handed over my registration, title, and insurance, all under my name and address. Beverly, of course, whipped out her own paper, claiming it proved she'd sold the very same car to a Robert Mitchell in Las Vegas just last week, for $75,000. Rodriguez looked between the two sets of documents and sighed. "Mr. Miller, this is unusual. She's got a bill of sale, but your papers show continuous ownership. Can you prove the vehicle's been in your possession for some time?" I smiled. If Beverly wanted to play games, I had cards she couldn't. Imagine. My father had been obsessed with car thieves back in his day, and this Shelby carried more hidden secrets than she could guess. "Officer, I've got progress photos, restoration videos, and a build log covering the last 22 months. But the best proof? Pop the hood. You'll find something carved into the engine block." As we walked toward the car, I caught Beverly glancing skyward. I followed her eyes to a small drone hovering just above the tree line. Odd. None of my neighbors were into that kind of tech. Beverly quickly averted her eyes when she caught me watching, but the moment felt strange, unsettling. Earlier in our argument, she had dropped a peculiar remark. Harold always said, "Cars like this are worth a fortune." I had no idea who Harold was, but the way she delivered the line made it obvious this wasn't just about HOA rules or money. Something deeper was at play, something that gave Beverly the confidence to lie to the police and expect victory. The officer popped open the hood, and there it was. D. Miller, 1995, etched neatly into the engine block in my father's handwriting, alongside our old home address. Beverly's face shifted through several shades as she scrambled to explain how her supposed Nevada client had purchased a vehicle marked permanently with someone else's name. "Well, there must be some mix-up," she faltered, her tone stripped of the bravado she'd shown earlier. Officer Rodriguez glanced from her to me, his expression making it clear he sensed the situation didn't add up. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll need to see further documentation regarding this supposed sale." As Beverly fumbled with her phone, likely trying to reach whoever had crafted her fake paperwork, I noticed something even stranger. She knew far too much about my car's specifics, details invisible to casual inspection. Not the kind of facts a luxury car broker would have memorized about someone else's vehicle. She had mentioned the 428 Cobra jet engine, the gear ratio, even the custom exhaust I had installed just last month. Either she'd been watching my car obsessively, or someone had been feeding her intel. Rodriguez closed his notepad and gave her the look of a man realizing he'd stepped into a domestic mess about to escalate. "Ma'am, you'll need to come down to the station and clear up some details about this transaction. Mr. Miller, we may ask you for additional paperwork later, but for now, this appears to be your car." Beverly flushed crimson, recognizing her plan had crumbled spectacularly, but just before the officers left, she played one last card. "Fine, but I'll be calling my lawyer, and Harold Green. Let's see how confident Mr. Miller feels once he's dealing with people who actually know how these things work." The police departed with Beverly's promise to resolve her paperwork issues. I remained in the driveway long after their cars disappeared, staring at the drone still buzzing in the distance. The whole thing felt staged, as if Beverly had been expecting this confrontation and had prepared for it. And yet, her reaction when it all fell apart seemed genuine, like she'd been poorly prepped by whoever was backing her. If Beverly Lang believed she could bully me into surrendering my father's car, she was about to discover that the Miller family doesn't fold, especially when the odds are in our favor. The following morning, I rang my sister Emily before my coffee finished brewing. She'd always been the practical one, which explained why she chose law school while I preferred engines and grease. At 28, she was wrapping up her final year clerking for Patterson and Associates. She had never been a fan of what she called my overpriced hobby, but after yesterday, her perspective had shifted. "Ethan, Beverly's behavior yesterday was flat out insane," she said immediately upon answering. "I've been turning it over in my head all night. Normal people don't call the cops with forged documents. Either she's completely unhinged, or this is part of something bigger." That's when I made what most would call a backward move. Instead of fighting to keep the Shelby in my garage where Beverly could keep harassing me, I allowed it to be temporarily impounded in the city's storage facility. Emily thought I'd lost it, until I explained. "Look, Em, if she wants to play her little games with fake papers and mysterious calls to this Harold guy, fine. I'll let her believe she's winning while I figure out what's really going on." What I hadn't told the officers was that Dad had once installed a hidden backup GPS unit during his racing days, buried deep inside the engine compartment where no casual inspection would uncover it. Before they hauled the car away, I also slipped a second tracker beneath the rear bumper, small enough to look like original hardware. With the Shelby now locked up under 24/7 surveillance, I did what any decent engineer does when faced with a complex puzzle. I started collecting data. Beverly's social media accounts were a goldmine. She clearly had no grasp of privacy settings. Her Facebook page revealed a lifestyle that didn't line up with the salary of a suburban HOA president. Designer bags, expensive restaurant tabs, and snapshots from luxury car auctions in 3 different states. Even more telling was her work history, which Emily dug up from public records. Turns out Beverly had once been employed by Green and Associates Real Estate, a firm owned by one Harold Green. "Ethan, check this out," Emily said, pulling up county property records on her laptop. We were sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by sticky notes and printouts like a pair of amateur detectives in a suburban crime drama. Harold Green isn't just some business contact. He's the chairman of the city council, and according to these records, he's been knee-deep in some major real estate deals over the past 5 years. What made things even more intriguing was that Beverly hadn't exactly left Green and Associates on the best of terms. Not long after she became president of our neighborhood HOA, I decided one evening to take a closer look at that device she'd been eyeing the day before. It turned out not to be a harmless drone belonging to a hobbyist. Hidden deep in the bushes along my property line, I discovered a compact listening device, the sort you could pick up online for a couple $100. It was positioned perfectly to capture conversations happening in my driveway and garage, which suddenly made sense of how Beverly seemed to know every detail about the Shelby's specs. She hadn't been guessing, she'd been listening in on my calls with parts suppliers, my chats with fellow car enthusiasts, and even private talks with Emily about the restoration project. The following morning brought a twist I hadn't anticipated. Beverly had put up a 1968 Shelby GT500 for sale on 3 major auction sites, complete with professional-grade photos clearly taken in my own garage. She was asking $85,000, nearly twice its actual value, and described it as a fully restored, numbers-matching Eleanor tribute car. The boldest part was that she shamelessly used my car's images in the listing, apparently confident that nobody would connect the dots back to her. Emily's digging into legal records uncovered something even more alarming. Beverly wasn't just late on her mortgage. She was drowning in nearly $200,000 of debt to multiple creditors. One of the biggest was a company called International Auto Ventures, which specialized in exporting cars overseas. That level of financial pressure explained the reckless scheme, but it also suggested one stolen vehicle wouldn't be enough to fix her problems. This felt bigger, a coordinated effort, and I started to wonder how many other neighbors might have already been caught in her net. That night, the GPS tracker I'd tucked inside the Shelby finally pinged. The car was on the move, something that should have been impossible since it was supposedly locked away in the city impound lot. But the signal wasn't coming from there. It was emanating from an industrial warehouse district about 20 miles outside town. Either someone had quietly released my car without informing me, or Beverly's reach extended much farther than I'd assumed. Around midnight, the signal stopped, settling at a facility Google Maps labeled Westside Storage Solutions. When I called the impound lot the next morning, they insisted my Shelby was still in their custody and hadn't gone anywhere, which left only 2 options. Beverly's crew had managed to duplicate my car, or they had somehow penetrated a secure city facility. Meanwhile, Emily's research into Harold Green painted him as someone with enough political pull to sway local law enforcement in property disputes. If he was indeed the Harold Beverly kept mentioning, then this was no longer about a desperate HOA president trying to swipe a car. This was a coordinated scheme with someone powerful propping her up. That evening, Marcus Rodriguez, my retired neighbor from 3 doors down, showed up at my doorstep with news that shifted everything. Marcus was the type who stayed cordial, but distant, keeping his lawn trimmed and his nose out of neighborhood drama. Yet that night he sat down at my kitchen table with the quiet determination of someone who'd decided to get involved. "Ethan, I couldn't help noticing all the noise yesterday," he began. "There's something you ought to know about Beverly and this Harold Green." He explained that last year Harold had visited him 3 separate times under the guise of being friendly. Each visit, though, included oddly specific questions about Marcus's vintage motorcycle collection. A week after Harold's final stop, Beverly began slapping Marcus with obscure HOA violations he'd never heard of before. The pattern was undeniable now, but the scale of it stunned me. This wasn't just a woman making reckless choices out of desperation. It was an organized operation aimed at seizing high-value personal property across the neighborhood, backed by someone with the authority to provide cover and legitimacy. As I stared at the GPS marker showing my Shelby sitting in a warehouse I'd never heard of, it hit me that tomorrow would bring either answers or a brand new mess I wasn't ready for. If Beverly thought she could scare me into backing down, she was about to learn the hard way that engineers are very good at tackling complicated problems, especially when someone threatens what we hold dearest. That same evening, Emily walked through my door carrying a box of Dad's old work files I'd stashed in the attic years back. "I didn't sleep a wink last night after hearing what Marcus told us about Harold," she admitted, emptying a stack of papers across my kitchen table. Something about his name kept gnawing at me. so I thought we should check if Dad had ever mentioned him. What we uncovered in those faded yellow documents felt like stumbling onto a roadmap of a conspiracy I'd never imagined existed. Tucked inside a 1995 company newsletter was a group photo from the aerospace firm's annual picnic, and there, standing beside my father with a strained smile, was a much younger Harold Green. The caption beneath it read, "Harold Green, Quality Assurance Manager, celebrating his promotion to senior oversight." Marcus had already agreed to assist with surveillance, and with 40 years as a private investigator behind him, he was the perfect guide in the art of tailing someone, without being noticed. "Patience is everything," he instructed as we sat parked across from Beverly's house at 6 in the morning. "But people like her stick to routines, and routines always open doors." At exactly 7:30, Beverly pulled out in her white BMW, heading straight toward the warehouse district, the same area where my GPS tracker had mysteriously gone dark 2 nights earlier. What we found there made my stomach knot. The building carried a sign reading Westside Storage Solutions, but the inside told another story. Behind the chain-link fence sat at least a dozen high-end classic cars, each in some stage of prep for transport. A 1967 Mustang, eerily similar to the one Mrs. Patterson once kept in her garage. A vintage Harley-Davidson that matched Marcus's description of his stolen bike. And in the far corner, hidden beneath a tarp but instantly recognizable to me, my Shelby. "This isn't just about your car," Marcus murmured while snapping photos with a telephoto lens. "This is a full-scale operation targeting the neighborhood's most valuable property. What we're looking at is way bigger than anything Beverly could pull off by herself." Meanwhile, Emily's research into Harold's business records painted an even darker picture. His firm, Green and Associates, marketed itself as an estate liquidation and asset management company. On the surface, it seemed legitimate until you noticed that most of their clients were elderly homeowners who had mysteriously sold prized possessions for far less than market value. "Check this out," Emily said, showing me a spreadsheet she had compiled. 15 different families in our neighborhood sold cars, motorcycles, or collectibles through Harold's firm in just the past 2 years, and every single one of them received HOA violations from Beverly within 6 months beforehand. The alignment was too precise to be coincidence. That evening, Jake Thompson, our neighborhood electrician, knocked on my door with more pieces of the puzzle. "Ethan, I've been mulling over what you told me yesterday, and something strange came." "Back to me," he said, visibly uneasy. "Last month, Beverly hired me to install new security systems around the common areas, but the equipment she requested wasn't your standard setup. This was professional surveillance tech." Jake had refused the job, but he kept the specs. Emily recognized them instantly. High-grade monitoring devices capable of tracking vehicles and even recording conversations from a distance. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Patterson phoned with information that tied everything together. The 85-year-old widow had been battling HOA complaints for months over her late husband's vintage piano, which she stored improperly according to Beverly's rules. "But here's the odd part, dear," she told me, her voice trembling. "Harold Green came to my house 3 separate times last month asking detailed questions about that piano. He knew it was a 1924 Steinway Model M. He knew all about the custom modifications my husband had made. He even asked about the original purchase papers. How on earth could he know so much unless he had researched it?" The scheme was becoming crystal clear. Harold identified valuable property, Beverly created the pressure through HOA violations, and then Harold's company appeared with convenient solutions to acquire those assets. Emily's legal digging unearthed the most damning evidence of all. Beverly's financial troubles weren't just personal debts, they were carefully structured obligations intertwined with Harold's businesses. She showed me filings proving Beverly was a minority partner in 3 of Harold's companies. "She's tied to him financially," Emily explained. "That means she couldn't walk away from this even if she wanted to." Bank records also revealed that for the past 18 months, Beverly had been making steady payments to an entity called International Auto Ventures. That very night, my Shelby's GPS tracker came alive again, this time moving toward the shipping district near the port. Emily and I followed at a cautious distance until we spotted Beverly overseeing the loading of what appeared to be my car onto a truck bound for the shipping terminal. "We need to contact Agent Rebecca Taylor at Customs Enforcement," Emily said firmly, already dialing the number she had prepared. "If their plan is to smuggle stolen cars overseas, then we're dealing with a federal crime, and that means we have a real chance to shut this down before your Shelby vanishes for good." As we watched the truck roll out of the warehouse lot, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. The voice on the line was steady, deliberate, and disturbingly self-assured. "Hello, Ethan. This is Harold Green. I think it's time you and I talked about your father and about some unresolved business from decades ago." The call cut off abruptly, but the message couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't just about my car anymore. It reached back to something that began 30 years earlier, and Harold Green had been preparing for this confrontation far longer than I'd ever suspected. That phone call shook me more than I cared to admit, but it also confirmed what I'd started to fear after discovering that old company photograph. This had never been just about stolen vehicles, it was personal, and it had been personal for 3 decades. I spent the rest of the night tearing through Dad's files, combing for any trace of Harold Green or a clue that could explain why a city council chairman would carry a 30-year vendetta against a dead man. Inside a manila folder labeled Insurance Claims 1995, I found something that made my stomach tighten: safety reports, copies Dad had filed on defective aircraft components, each one flagged for investigation, each one approved and signed off by none other than Harold Green. Before dawn, Emily showed up with Agent Rebecca Taylor, a sharp-eyed customs officer who looked like she'd rather be busting narcotics smugglers than tracking down car thieves. "Mr. Miller," she began, laying photos across my kitchen table, "your sisters filled me in, and I need to tell you, the activity you're describing matches a pattern we've been monitoring for 6 months. The photos revealed shipping yards, warehouses, and paperwork that looked disturbingly familiar, almost identical to Beverly's operation. We've uncovered at least 3 networks like this across different states," Taylor continued. "Local officials abusing their positions to identify and seize valuable private property, then funneling it overseas for profit." The GPS tracker hidden on the Shelby was now pinging from the port, but as Agent Taylor explained, storming the facility without airtight warrants and coordination between multiple agencies would leave any evidence useless in court. "Harold Green's influence runs deep enough that anything short of an ironclad case will collapse," she said. "But there's another way. If we catch them in the act, physically transferring stolen property for overseas shipping, we'll have a case his lawyers can't bury." The plan was brutally simple and terrifying. Let them think they were winning while we documented every step of their crime. Later, in the garage surrounded by tools and the Shelby's half-restored parts, I couldn't help but think about Dad, and all the conversations we'd never had. Emily must have sensed my thoughts. She sat beside me on the old workbench, the same spot where Dad once explained engines to me. "You know, I never understood why you poured so much of yourself into that car," she said softly. "But watching you fight for it these past few days, I think I get it now. It's not really about the car, is it?" She was right. The Shelby wasn't just a car. It was the last real link I had to Dad. But more than that, it embodied his principles, that some things are worth defending, that craftsmanship and honesty matter, and that you never let bullies steal what isn't theirs. Agent Taylor's phone buzzed with a new alert. "Your car's scheduled to be loaded onto a container ship bound for Dubai tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. We've coordinated with international customs, but we have to wait until they actually put it into the container. That's when it becomes international trafficking." The 12 hours that followed were the longest of my life. Beverly vanished from social media, which almost certainly meant she knew she was being watched. Harold hadn't called back, but his silence felt heavier, more menacing than any direct threat. Marcus joined us for the overnight stakeout, armed with coffee and surveillance equipment that made me glad to have him on my side. "I've been thinking about this Harold Green," Marcus said as we trained long lenses on the shipping yard. "In my 40 years as a PI, I've seen people like him. They don't start with big schemes. They start small, little abuses of power, until they graduate to bigger, riskier crimes. My guess? Your dad wasn't his first victim, and you won't be his last. The thought was chilling, but it only strengthened my resolve. Around 3 in the morning, Beverly's BMW rolled into the port, followed closely by a truck carrying my Shelby. Agent Taylor quietly called in backup, but reminded us to hold off until the workers actually began loading. The legal difference between conspiracy and international trafficking comes down to those minutes when the stolen car is physically placed into the container, she explained. Through the surveillance feed, we saw Beverly directing workers toward a container marked BVLG 2024. They began lining up the car lift, and just then my phone rang again. Harold's voice came through calm as ever, but this time there was something else in it. A note of satisfaction. I hope you're enjoying the show, Ethan. But before this goes any further, there's something you should know. Your father wasn't the hero you believe he was. Those safety reports he filed, they weren't about protecting anyone. They were about covering up his own mistakes. When the FAA began digging around, his plan was to take a hefty payout and vanish, leaving you and your mom to deal with the fallout. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I remembered how tense Dad's last weeks had been, but I'd always chalked it up to work stress, not some buried scandal. Agent Taylor caught my expression, gripped my arm, and said, "Don't buy into his lies, Ethan. People like Harold know exactly how to twist your head. He's trying to break you right when we're on the verge of catching him." Still, the seed of doubt had already been planted. What if everything I thought I knew about Dad was false? What if this fight to protect the Shelby was really about clinging to a lie? Watching crews prepare to load my father's car into a container. Bound overseas, I realized tomorrow would bring answers I wasn't sure I even wanted, but it was far too late to walk away. We'd come too far, and Harold Green had made things too personal for retreat. At 5:47 a.m., Agent Taylor gave the signal that turned the tide. "Go, go, go!" she shouted into her radio as federal agents, port security, and local police stormed container BVLG 2024 from 3 sides. What unfolded looked like a scene straight out of a film, except this time I was in the middle of it, watching my father's Shelby turned into evidence in what Taylor later called the largest interstate property theft ring they had ever taken. Down. Beverly was caught in the act, clutching a clipboard filled with shipping manifests not only for my car, but 8 other classics that had quietly disappeared across 3 states. The moment she realized she was surrounded will stay with me forever. The once fearless woman who had called the police on me only days earlier crumpled on the dock, sobbing like a child. "I didn't want to do this," she kept repeating as Taylor read her rights. "Harold forced me. He said if I didn't help, I'd lose everything. He's got files on us, recordings, photos. You don't understand what he can do." For the first time, Beverly showed real emotion, and despite everything, I almost pitied her. Inside the container, we uncovered far more than stolen cars. It was a well-oiled system revealing the full reach of Harold's operation. Mrs. Patterson's, 1924. Steinway piano was there, padded and marked for shipment to a German collector. Marcus's vintage Harley had been crated for export to Japan. Jake Thompson's father's collection of rare pocket watches had been cataloged as though it belonged in a museum. "This isn't simple theft," Taylor muttered while photographing the evidence. "This is cultural heritage trafficking. They're stripping communities of their history, piece by piece." Beverly's confession, captured on the dock with federal agents listening, painted Harold Green as the mastermind behind a 5-year criminal empire. He scouted families in well-off neighborhoods, zeroing in on the elderly or financially struggling who owned antiques or collectible vehicles. Using his city council seat, he accessed property records, tax files, even insurance data. Once he had his targets, Beverly would pile on HOA violations or other city pressures until the victims were desperate enough to sell. The cold precision of the scheme was staggering. And it wasn't limited to our neighborhood, Beverly admitted. Harold had the same setup running in 15 other communities, each overseen by an HOA president or local official trapped through blackmail or bribery. "He keeps dirt on everyone," she said, swollen eyes fixed on me. Money problems, secrets, whatever he can use. That's how he kept me in line. That's how he kept all of them. Taylor immediately called in raids on all 15 sites, but the look on her face said it all. This case was far bigger than anyone expected. When they finally uncovered my Shelby, it was bittersweet. 2 years of restoration had been carefully protected. Harold's people knew the car's value and treated it with care, but seeing it boxed up like cargo made me understand Mrs. Patterson's heartbreak over her piano. These weren't just valuables. They were fragments of family history, connections to loved ones, irreplaceable memories. Then came the moment that blew it all open. Beverly's live stream from inside the container. Her meltdown, broadcast to 847 Facebook followers, captured. Her admitting on tape that she had helped Harold steal from our neighbors for 3 years. By morning, the video had gone viral. The comments poured in. "This happened to my grandmother in Phoenix," one person wrote. "She lost her husband's vintage guitar collection to someone just like this Harold Green." Within the first 6 hours, the livestream had been shared over 50,000 times, unwillingly casting Beverly as the face of suburban crime victimhood. At the port facility, Harold Green arrived just as Beverly was being loaded into a federal transport van. While Beverly crumbled under the weight of her arrest, Harold carried himself differently, calm, confident, stepping out of his sleek black sedan like a man convinced his political allies would shield him from accountability. Agent Taylor intercepted him halfway across the lot. I couldn't hear their words, but Harold's posture betrayed everything. His shoulders slumped when she showed him photographs from inside the container, and the smug expression on his lawyer's face dissolved the instant Taylor handed over. "A federal arrest warrant. Mr. Miller," Agent Taylor called to me as Harold was being processed, "Mr. Green has asked to speak with you privately before transport. You're not required to accept, but he insists he has information about your father you'll want to hear." When I finally stood across from Harold Green, I was unsettled by how ordinary he seemed. The man who had terrorized our community and stripped families of their most precious belongings looked like nothing more than a 60-year-old executive in an expensive suit. But his eyes, cold, piercing, made my skin crawl. 30 years ago, your father discovered something about me that could have ruined everything, Harold said evenly, the cuffs on his wrists rattling as he spoke. But before he could expose me, he died in that convenient racing accident. And when I sifted through his belongings afterward, do you know what I found? Not evidence of noble intentions, evidence that he meant to blackmail me, just as I've blackmailed others all these years. He gave me a smile so chilling it hardly seemed human. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Ethan. Your father was just like me, only he got caught before he could cash in." His words struck me like a blow to the chest. Before I could answer, Agent Taylor stepped in, her expression leaving no doubt she'd had enough of Harold's games. "Mr. Green, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. Anything else you say can and will be used in federal court." Still, Harold wasn't finished. As agents pulled him toward the transport vehicle, he turned back, with that same icy grin. "Ask your sister about the safety deposit box, Ethan. Ask her what your father left behind." The remark was meant to stir more doubt, but the way Emily paled told me he wasn't bluffing. The ride home was silent, each of us lost in thought. Beverly now faced federal charges for racketeering, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of stolen goods. Harold's arrest triggered coordinated raids across 15 cities, with early estimates suggesting over $50 million in stolen property recovered. Yet none of that quieted the echo of Harold's final words about Dad. Emily, uncharacteristically withdrawn, admitted when pressed that she had once found a key among Dad's belongings, but had never pursued what it opened. Meanwhile, Beverly, ever desperate to protect her reputation, tried to stage a defense from custody. Her daughter had smuggled her a contraband phone, and Beverly attempted a live stream to her dwindling Facebook audience. The video lagged, the audio garbled her. Voice into robotic nonsense. "My dear friends, isn't completely innocent," she stammered. "Harold Green is the real bees at Criminal Mastermind." The comments were merciless. "Lady, you confessed live on TV this morning," one wrote. Another posted, Karen.exe has stopped working. Her technical fiasco peaked when she held up a sign, reading Harold Asmustis's Mastermind. The frame rate was so poor it looked like she was simply flailing a sheet of paper while screeching nonsense. Amid the unintended comedy, Agent Taylor called with updates. "Ethan, what we uncovered in Harold's offices will blow this case wide open," she said with awe. "He documented everything. Victim profiles, financial records, psychological assessments, even recordings of private conversations. It's like he wrote a textbook on organized theft, and we've recovered his insurance files, the blackmail material he used to control his network." That afternoon, Emily returned from the bank with a manila envelope from Dad's safety deposit box. What we discovered inside reshaped everything I thought I knew. There were reports Dad had filed about Harold approving defective aircraft components, but also a cassette tape. On it, Harold's voice, unmistakable even 30 years later, threatened Dad's life if he didn't withdraw his FAA reports. "If you think you can ruin me with your self-righteous whistleblowing, you're making a dangerous mistake. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut." Beside it was an unsent letter to the FBI. "If something happens to me, I want my family to know I tried to do the right thing, even when it became dangerous." The final lines made my throat tighten. "I'm not planning to disappear or abandon my family, no matter what Harold claims. I'm gathering evidence so my son grows up in a world where men like Harold Green face consequences. Dad hadn't been scheming to blackmail Harold. He had been trying to stop him, just as we were doing now." Meanwhile, Beverly's live stream escalated into farce. With better internet, her audio came through clearly, though she appeared to be broadcasting from a detention center bathroom under flickering lights. "Harold Green has manipulated us all," she shouted. "He has files on every neighbor. Your affairs, your debts, your secrets." The chat exploded, some concerned, most mocking. "Ma'am, this is a Wendy's," one comment read, racking up hundreds of likes. The comedy peaked when Beverly accidentally switched to her front camera, spending half a minute ranting at her own bewildered reflection. Later, Agent Taylor summoned us to the federal building for Harold's interrogation. For the first time, his polished mask cracked. Presented with the audio recording, his lawyer immediately sought a plea deal. "My client is ready to fully cooperate in exchange for leniency," she announced, but Harold sat stricken, like a man watching 3 decades of careful deceit collapse. "How long have you had that tape?" he demanded, ignoring his lawyer's warnings. "Since the day my father died," I said, "a lie in practice but true in spirit. He knew exactly who you were. He made sure the truth would come out." That was the moment Harold finally broke, the man who had stolen from 15 communities, destroyed countless memories, and amassed millions through intimidation, dissolved into tears in a federal interrogation room. He broke down, sobbing, "I never wanted anyone to get hurt." For the first time in decades, it felt like he was actually telling the truth. It hadn't started as some grand scheme, just a few small things taken here and there, from people who likely wouldn't even notice. But it grew, it became easier, more profitable, and eventually unstoppable. Beverly's livestream reached a peak of unintentional comedy the night she tried to shut it off, only to accidentally start a brand new broadcast instead. This time, she was clearly somewhere else, possibly a holding cell, speaking to someone off camera. A federal agent. "What do you mean I can't get bail?" she blurted out, completely unaware that hundreds of people were still watching. "I cooperated. I told you everything about Harold. I even handed over the spreadsheets." The agent's calm voice explained that federal trafficking charges rarely allowed bail, but Beverly kept interrupting, her arguments growing more desperate. "I have a dentist appointment on Thursday. My book club meets Friday. You can't just keep me here forever." The comment section had a field day. One top-voted remark summed it up perfectly. "Karen wants to speak to the federal manager." That evening, as we walked out of the federal building, something washed over me, something I hadn't felt since this ordeal began. Peace. Real, honest peace. Harold Green was facing charges that would almost certainly end with him spending the rest of his life behind bars. Beverly had cut a deal through cooperation and would serve time, though less than Harold. Dad's reputation, once under shadow, was not only restored but elevated. He had died trying to stop the very crimes now exposed 3 decades later. Shelby was mine again, rightfully and honorably, and Harold's corrupt network had been dismantled across 3 states. But the greatest victory wasn't legal or financial. It was simpler. Truth had finally beaten lies, and justice had arrived. Late, perhaps, but certain. A year later, on a cool Saturday morning, I stood in my garage watching sunlight spill across Eleanor's polished chrome. The past 12 months had brought changes I never could have imagined. When Beverly first accused me of stealing my own car, the federal case against Harold was already concluding. He received life in prison without parole, one of the oldest ever sentenced under federal racketeering laws. Beverly got 7 years but would likely serve less with continued cooperation and good behavior. More importantly, the victims of their scheme had recovered more than $47 million in property, and 15 neighborhoods dismantled their corrupt HOA systems in favor of transparent democratic councils. Emily passed the bar and opened a practice focused on property rights and elder abuse. Her first big client was Mrs. Patterson, who successfully sued Harold's estate for emotional distress. She used the settlement to establish a foundation for elderly victims of financial fraud. Reviewing files at my kitchen table, Emily admitted, "I never thought I'd say this, but watching you fight for that car taught me what matters. It's not the money or the objects. It's about standing up to people who think power gives them the right to take whatever they want." Her firm flourished, fueled by referrals from victims of similar schemes uncovered after Harold's arrest. Marcus Rodriguez was elected the first president of our new neighborhood council. He approached the role with the precision of a career investigator. His first action, a property protection protocol requiring any complaint about personal belongings to be reviewed by a 3-person committee, plus a mandatory cooling-off period before action could be taken. The goal is to make sure no one can ever again weaponize bureaucracy against their neighbors, he explained to a crowd of over 200 residents from nearby communities. He also launched a consulting business, helping other neighborhoods reform their HOA systems. Jake Thompson used his restitution settlement to start Thompson Security Solutions, a company that protected valuable collections and personal property. His first contract was with a vintage car club targeted by copycat criminals inspired by Harold's scheme. "The best part," Jake told me while installing a cutting-edge system in my garage, "is I get to help people protect what they love, instead of worrying about who's trying to steal it." His company grew to 4 full-time employees with plans to expand. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson became a celebrated advocate for victims' rights. She toured 3 states giving speeches, testified before legislative committees, and championed stronger protections against organized theft. Her 1924 Steinway piano, fully restored at Harold's expense, now served as the centerpiece of a music therapy program she founded at the local senior center. "Harold thought he could steal my memories with my husband's piano," she said in a televised interview. "But memories can't be packed into a container and shipped overseas. They live in here," she tapped her chest, "and no one can take them." Agent Rebecca Taylor, promoted to lead the newly formed Federal Property Crimes Task Force, oversaw a unit dedicated to dismantling organized theft rings like Harold's. In just 1 year, the task force had disrupted 12 schemes across 8 states, recovered over $200 million in stolen assets, and arrested 47 suspects. "Harold's case taught us property crime isn't just about lone thieves," she explained at a press conference. "It's about organized groups hiding behind legitimate institutions like HOAs and government offices." Their success prompted congressional hearings on federal oversight of local housing authorities. Eleanor herself became something of a landmark, appearing in car shows and community events as a symbol of perseverance and justice. I had finished Dad's restoration exactly as he planned, guided by his notes and sketches. A small brass plaque on the dashboard read, "In memory of David Miller, a man who chose truth over safety." But the Shelby inspired me to fulfill another of Dad's dreams. Using federal restitution funds and community donations, I opened the David Miller Technical Training Center, a nonprofit teaching automotive and aerospace skills to underprivileged youth, operating out of a donated warehouse. The center boasted 4 working bays, a machine shop, and classrooms for 30 students. Our first graduating class of 12 all secured jobs with local companies, earning an average of $18 an hour. Your father would be so proud, Emily told me as we watched students rebuild their first engine. He always believed skills and integrity were the greatest gifts you could give young people. The program had a waiting list of over 100 applicants and interest from communities nationwide. Ironically, Harold's final safeguard, his insurance USB, only deepened his downfall. It held not just evidence of his crimes, but recordings that implicated 6 other officials in corruption. The district attorney used it to prosecute a county commissioner, 2 city planners, and 3 HOA board members linked to Harold's network. Criminals always make the same mistake, Agent Taylor told me during our final debriefing. They assume everyone else is corrupt too. They don't realize honest people will eventually use their evidence against them. Our community, once nearly broken by Harold's scheme, emerged stronger and more united. Property values rose, fueled by buyers drawn to neighborhoods with reformed governance and strong oversight. The annual Harold Green Memorial Car Show, ironically named since Harold was still alive in federal prison, became a major regional event, raising money for victims' programs. No one seemed eager to change the name of something that brought such positivity. One crisp morning, as I closed the garage door and prepared to take Eleanor to our monthly cars and coffee gathering, I thought about how much had changed since Beverly's first 911 call. Harold tried to tear our community apart and steal what mattered most. Instead, his crimes united us more powerfully than neighborly goodwill ever could. Eleanor's engine purred with the sound my dad intended, but now it carried the voices of an entire community that had learned to fight back. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes 30 years. But it always comes, if good people refuse to surrender. So let me ask, what would you have done if your neighbor called the cops claiming you stole your own car? Would you have stood your ground like Ethan, or given in? This story proves that justice may not be immediate, but it's always worth the fight. If tales of suburban corruption and family legacy like this kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe for more stories where truth always prevails.